The truth about an emergency can disappear in minutes, but one honest witness can bring it back. Nathan Brooks had planned for nothing more exciting than finishing the fresh mulch around the flower beds lining his front yard before the afternoon heat settled over the neighborhood. The quiet suburban street felt completely ordinary. Lawn sprinklers clicked rhythmically across trimmed grass. Delivery vans rolled slowly through the community, and neighbors waved from their driveways as they finished weekend chores. Nathan glanced toward the neighborhood clubhouse, just as an unexpected commotion broke the peaceful routine. Several residents suddenly gathered near the walking path beside the community recreation area, pointing towards someone who appeared to need immediate assistance. Without stopping to think, Nathan set down his gardening gloves and hurried across the street. By the time he reached the gathering, 2 other neighbors were already offering help, while another resident placed a call requesting emergency assistance. Nathan stayed calm, helping clear space around the area so everyone could move safely and making sure the pathway remained open for arriving responders. Nobody argued. Nobody panicked. Everyone simply worked together because every second felt important. Within only a few minutes, emergency personnel arrived and quickly took control of the situation. The surrounding neighbors stepped back, allowing the trained professionals to do their work. Nathan quietly answered a few basic questions about what he had personally seen before returning to the edge of the crowd. The situation appeared to stabilize, and many residents slowly drifted back toward their homes, believing the difficult moment had passed. As Nathan walked home, he felt relieved that so many neighbors had reacted quickly and cooperated without hesitation. He never imagined the real problem had not even begun. The following morning, Nathan opened his email while drinking coffee before work. Sitting at the top of his inbox was a community-wide message from the Homeowners Association signed by HOA President Karen Whitmore. The subject line referenced the previous day's emergency. Curious, Nathan opened the notice expecting information about community safety procedures or appreciation for the residents who had responded responsibly. Instead, he stopped reading halfway through the first paragraph. The official message described the incident in a way that did not match what Nathan had witnessed. It suggested that unnecessary interference from a resident had complicated the early moments before emergency personnel arrived. Although no name appeared in the email, several details strongly implied that the unnamed resident was Nathan. He read the message again, hoping he had misunderstood. The wording remained careful and professional, but the timeline felt strangely different from reality. According to the notice, events unfolded in an order that Nathan knew was inaccurate because he had been standing there from the very beginning. His phone began vibrating with messages from neighbors asking whether he had seen the announcement. One person simply wrote, "I thought you were helping." Another asked whether everything in the email was true. Nathan looked through his front window and noticed 2 neighbors quietly talking near their mailboxes while occasionally glancing toward his house. Rumors were already moving faster than facts. Instead of answering immediately, Nathan replayed every moment of the previous afternoon in his mind. He remembered exactly where each person had been standing when emergency responders had arrived, and how several homes overlooking the clubhouse had visible security cameras facing the same direction. He was not interested in arguing with anyone or defending himself through emotional conversations. If the official story differed from what actually happened, there had to be a way to establish the complete timeline using facts instead of opinions. As he picked up his car keys for work, Nathan looked once more toward the clubhouse across the neighborhood. Something about the email felt less like a misunderstanding and more like the beginning of a much larger story, and he quietly realized that before long, the truth would depend on far more than anyone's memory. Nathan arrived home that evening expecting the neighborhood to have moved on from the previous day's emergency, but the atmosphere felt noticeably different. Small conversations stopped as he walked past them, and several neighbors offered polite smiles that seemed uncertain rather than friendly. Nobody confronted him directly, yet the official email had clearly shaped how people remembered an event they had barely witnessed themselves. Nathan unlocked his front door, set his keys on the kitchen counter, and opened the Homeowners Association message once more. This time he read every sentence carefully instead of reacting emotionally. The wording never accused him by name, yet it described a resident stepping into the situation before emergency personnel arrived in a way that suggested unnecessary interference. Nathan knew that was not what had happened. He remembered standing several feet away after helping keep the walkway clear while another neighbor contacted emergency services. He also remembered that the responders had reached the scene without delay because everyone nearby had cooperated. The official version did not simply leave out details. It rearranged them. Before Nathan could decide what to do next, his doorbell rang. Standing outside was his next-door neighbor, Olivia Grant, holding a small casserole dish she had borrowed the previous week. After returning it, she hesitated before quietly asking whether he had seen the community email. Nathan nodded. Olivia admitted that she had been near the clubhouse when everything happened and clearly remembered Nathan helping organize the crowd so emergency responders could reach the area easily. She frowned as she explained that the email did not sound like the event she had witnessed. Nathan thanked her for saying so, but resisted the urge to debate the issue. Instead, he simply asked one question. Had anyone taken photographs or recorded anything that afternoon? Olivia paused for a moment before pointing toward the row of homes facing the recreation area. She reminded Nathan that several houses had doorbell cameras covering the sidewalks leading to the clubhouse. One family also maintained a security camera above their garage that overlooked much of the common area entrance. Nathan suddenly realized the neighborhood itself might have quietly documented the entire sequence without anyone paying attention. The next morning, before leaving for work, Nathan received another email from Karen Whitmore. This message announced a special homeowners association meeting later that week to discuss community safety procedures following the emergency. Residents were encouraged to attend so everyone could better understand the incident. Nathan immediately noticed something missing. The announcement referred only to the written summary already distributed and made no mention of gathering statements from residents who had actually been present. That omission bothered him more than the original email. If the purpose was to understand what had happened, why not begin by asking the people who had witnessed it? During his lunch break, Nathan called the community management office and politely asked whether residents would have an opportunity to share first-hand observations during the meeting. The representative explained that the agenda had not yet been finalized, but suggested Nathan could submit any relevant information in writing beforehand. Nathan thanked the representative and ended the call feeling more determined than frustrated. As he drove home that evening, he slowed near the clubhouse and looked toward the surrounding homes. Small security cameras sat quietly beneath rooflines and beside garage doors, unnoticed by most people passing through the neighborhood. They had been recording ordinary days for years. If they had also recorded the emergency, then somewhere inside those silent video files existed a complete timeline that neither memory nor rumor could change, and Nathan decided that before the meeting took place, he would find out exactly what those cameras had seen. Nathan began knocking on doors the very next afternoon, not to convince anyone that the official email was wrong, but to ask a much simpler question. Had any security cameras recorded the area around the clubhouse during the emergency? His first stop was the home directly across from the recreation area, where an older neighbor named Richard Evans welcomed him inside after hearing the reason for his visit. Richard admitted he rarely reviewed his camera recordings because nothing unusual ever happened in the neighborhood, but he agreed that if the footage could help clarify the timeline, Nathan was welcome to look. Within minutes, they were sitting in front of a computer scrolling back to the afternoon of the incident. The recording immediately confirmed several details Nathan already remembered. Residents had gathered near the walking path. One neighbor had placed the emergency call almost immediately, and Nathan had arrived only after noticing the crowd from his yard. The video also showed him directing people to leave enough space for emergency responders to reach the area without delay. Richard quietly paused the recording and looked at Nathan. "That does not match the email at all," he said. Nathan nodded but resisted making any conclusions. One camera was useful, but he wanted a complete timeline rather than isolated moments. Later that evening, Olivia Grant introduced Nathan to another family whose garage camera covered the entrance road leading toward the clubhouse. That recording added another important piece. It showed the emergency vehicle entering the neighborhood without obstruction only minutes after the initial gathering formed. The pathway remained clear throughout the arrival, exactly as Nathan remembered. Even more interesting, the timestamps lined up perfectly with Richard's recording. Together, they created a continuous sequence from two different angles. Nathan carefully copied the files with each homeowner's permission, labeling every clip by location and exact time. He wanted everything organized before anyone else reviewed it. The following morning, his phone buzzed with another message from the Homeowners Association, reminding residents about the upcoming safety meeting. Karen Whitmore encouraged everyone to rely on the official summary distributed earlier in the week so discussions could remain productive. Nathan read the message twice. Once again, there was no request for eyewitness statements or additional documentation. Instead of becoming discouraged, he quietly continued collecting facts. By the end of the day, 3 more neighbors had agreed to review their recordings. One camera overlooked the sidewalk beside the clubhouse, another faced the parking lot, and a third captured the recreation area entrance from across the street. Each recording revealed a different angle, yet every one supported the same sequence of events. Nathan had not interrupted emergency personnel. He had not blocked access. He had simply helped keep the area organized until trained responders arrived. As Michael Turner, another resident who had watched part of the recordings, finished reviewing the files, he leaned back and frowned. He pointed toward the timestamps and noticed something Nathan had not considered. The official email described several actions occurring before emergency responders arrived. But according to the synchronized recordings, those same actions actually happened after the responders had already taken control of the scene. The order had been reversed. Nathan stared at the screen for several seconds without speaking. That small difference changed the meaning of the entire written summary. It was no longer just a matter of missing details. The sequence itself had been altered. As the evening sun settled over the neighborhood, Nathan carefully saved every recording into a single folder and began sketching a minute-by-minute timeline on a legal pad. The more he compared the videos, the more one conclusion became impossible to ignore. Somewhere between what the cameras had quietly recorded and what the official email claimed had happened, the story had been rewritten, and the upcoming meeting might become the first time the entire neighborhood saw both versions side by side. Nathan spent the next evening arranging every recording into a single chronological sequence so anyone could understand the events without needing technical knowledge. Each video was labeled with the address of the camera, the exact time stamp, and the direction it faced. Richard Evans sat beside him comparing time codes while Olivia Grant checked that every transition between recordings remained accurate. The result was a continuous timeline that followed the emergency from the first moment neighbors gathered until the area became quiet again after emergency personnel completed their work. Nathan watched the complete sequence twice. Every minute matched his memory. More importantly, every minute matched the next camera. There were no unexplained gaps and no conflicting angles. The recordings consistently showed residents cooperating, clearing the pathway, and allowing trained responders to work without interference. Nathan carefully saved duplicate copies of the files onto a second portable drive, wanting to protect the original recordings in case anyone requested them later. The following morning, he received an unexpected telephone call from the community management office. The representative politely explained that several homeowners had contacted the office asking whether residents would be allowed to present factual information during the upcoming meeting. Nathan answered honestly that he had collected several independent security recordings and hoped everyone would have an opportunity to review them together. The representative thanked him and replied that any documented information relevant to the incident would be welcomed during the discussion. The conversation gave Nathan quiet confidence because it suggested the meeting might focus on facts instead of assumptions. Later that afternoon, while walking home from his mailbox, Nathan noticed Karen Whitmore speaking with 2 board members outside the clubhouse. Their conversation stopped briefly as he approached before continuing in lower voices after he passed. Nathan simply nodded politely and continued walking without interrupting them. He had no interest in personal confrontation. The recordings would speak more clearly than any argument. That evening, another neighbor, Susan Miller, knocked on Nathan's door carrying a small notebook. She explained that she had written down the approximate times when she noticed emergency vehicles arriving because she had been waiting for a package delivery that afternoon. Curious, Nathan compared her handwritten notes with the synchronized security recordings. The arrival times matched almost exactly. Her simple observations independently confirmed the camera timestamps without relying on digital files alone. Nathan thanked her and added the notes to his growing folder. As he organized everything, one detail suddenly stood out. The official community email described the emergency as though the confusion had lasted several minutes before responders reached the scene. Yet every available recording showed that neighbors had quickly organized themselves and that emergency personnel arrived promptly after the first call. The difference was small in wording but significant in meaning. One version suggested unnecessary delays. The other showed calm cooperation. Before going to bed, Nathan printed a simple one-page timeline listing each verified event beside its corresponding camera timestamp. He intentionally avoided opinions, conclusions, or accusations. Every line contained only observable facts supported by recordings or witness notes. Looking over the completed page, he realized the timeline had become much stronger than he expected. It no longer depended on his own recollection because multiple independent sources supported every major event. As the night grew quiet outside, Nathan placed the folder and portable drives beside his front door so he would not forget them in the morning. The meeting was now less than 24 hours away, and for the first time since reading the original email, he felt prepared. Whatever happened next, the discussion would no longer depend on competing memories because an entire neighborhood had quietly preserved the truth one camera at a time. The evening of the community meeting arrived with an atmosphere unlike any Nathan Brooks had experienced since moving into the neighborhood. Cars filled the clubhouse parking lot well before the scheduled start, and small groups of residents gathered outside discussing the emergency in quieter voices than usual. Nathan carried only a slim folder, 2 portable drives, and the printed timeline he had carefully assembled from the independent security recordings. He reminded himself that his purpose was not to prove anyone wrong. His goal was simply to make sure the sequence of events reflected what had actually happened. Inside the meeting room, Karen Whitmore welcomed everyone and thanked residents for attending. She explained that the discussion would focus on community safety and the recent emergency response. As she summarized the official account already distributed by email, Nathan noticed several neighbors exchanging uncertain looks. The written version sounded familiar, yet many people in the room had now spoken with one another over the past several days. Questions had begun replacing assumptions. When Karen finished, the community management representative invited residents to present any documented information that could assist the review. Nathan quietly stood, thanked the representative, and placed his printed timeline on the front table where everyone could see it. Instead of beginning with opinions, he walked through the events minute by minute, matching every statement with a corresponding camera location and timestamp. Richard Evans confirmed the recordings from his home. Olivia Grant verified another angle. Susan Miller explained how her handwritten notes independently matched the arrival times shown in the videos. The representative carefully compared each source while the room remained completely silent. Nathan then connected his portable drive to the meeting room display. The first recording appeared on the screen, showing neighbors gathering near the walking path. A second camera immediately continued the sequence from another direction. Then a third recording completed the transition as emergency personnel entered the neighborhood without delay. Every clip blended naturally into the next because the timestamps aligned precisely. No confusion interrupted the arrival. No obstruction appeared on the pathway. The residents closest to the scene calmly moved aside exactly as Nathan remembered. As the synchronized timeline continued, Michael Turner quietly pointed toward the displayed clock in the corner of the recording. He compared it with the times referenced in the official summary. The difference became obvious within seconds. Several actions described as occurring before emergency responders arrived were actually shown taking place only after trained personnel had already assumed control of the situation. The sequence itself had changed. Nobody in the room interrupted the video. When the final recording ended, the silence lasted several moments longer than anyone expected. Finally, one board member leaned forward and asked whether the recordings had been edited in any way. Richard calmly explained how each file had been copied directly from the original devices, while the community management representative confirmed that the overlapping timestamps remained internally consistent across multiple independent systems. One by one, several neighbors acknowledged that the footage matched what they personally remembered seeing that afternoon. Karen looked down at the printed timeline for several seconds before requesting a brief recess so the board and management representative could review the documentation together. As residents slowly stood from their chairs, conversations sounded very different from those at the beginning of the meeting. People were no longer debating opinions. They were discussing verified times, camera angles, and the importance of preserving accurate records. Nathan quietly gathered his papers, but left the recordings connected to the display. For the first time since receiving the original email, he sensed that the discussion had finally shifted away from competing narratives and toward one simple question that everyone in the room now wanted answered. How had the official version become so different from the timeline every independent camera had quietly preserved? When the meeting resumed 20 minutes later, the atmosphere inside the clubhouse had completely changed. The quiet confidence that had filled the official presentation at the beginning of the evening had been replaced by careful attention to every document resting on the front table. The community management representative thanked everyone for their patience and explained that the synchronized recordings, handwritten notes, and printed timeline had all been reviewed together during the recess. Rather than offering an immediate conclusion, the representative invited Nathan Brooks to remain available while several factual questions were addressed one at a time. Nathan answered each question briefly, referring only to the recordings and never offering personal opinions. Richard Evans confirmed the original files remained stored on his camera system. Olivia Grant verified the recording from her property. Susan Miller again confirmed that her written notes had been made on the afternoon of the emergency before any community email had been distributed. The consistency between every source gradually became impossible to ignore. One board member then asked whether anyone had identified a recording that supported the exact sequence described in the official summary. A long silence followed. No resident raised a hand. No additional recording appeared. The community management representative slowly compared the official written timeline with the synchronized security footage displayed on the large screen. Event after event, the differences remained visible. The arrival of residents, the emergency call, the clearing of the walkway, and the arrival of trained responders all occurred in the same order across every independent camera. The representative carefully noted that the verified timeline consistently differed from the sequence described in the distributed email. Karen Whitmore listened without interrupting, occasionally reviewing her own printed documents before quietly setting them aside. Nathan noticed that the conversation no longer centered on him personally. Instead, everyone focused on reconstructing the emergency as accurately as possible. That shift alone felt like an important step forward. After another brief discussion among the board members, the community management representative announced that an independent administrative review would begin immediately following the meeting. Until that review was completed, the official summary would no longer be treated as the final record of the incident. A revised communication would be prepared after all available documentation had been evaluated. Several neighbors exchanged relieved smiles. Nobody applauded. The room simply relaxed as though a great deal of unnecessary tension had finally disappeared. Before the meeting ended, Michael Turner quietly raised another question. He asked whether additional recordings from the neighborhood entrance might help establish exactly when the first emergency call had been placed and how quickly responders arrived afterward. The representative agreed that completing the timeline from beginning to end would strengthen the review even further. Several homeowners immediately volunteered to check cameras that had not yet been examined, because everyone now understood the importance of building the most accurate record possible. Nathan thanked each neighbor for their willingness to help and emphasized that the goal had never been to criticize anyone. He simply believed that every emergency deserved an honest account so future decisions could rely on facts instead of incomplete information. As residents slowly left the clubhouse, the conversation sounded noticeably lighter than they had only an hour earlier. People discussed preserving camera recordings, improving communication, and encouraging witnesses to speak before official summaries were finalized. Walking toward his truck beneath the parking lot lights, Nathan felt that the neighborhood had crossed an invisible line. The question was no longer whether the original account contained mistakes. The real question had become how much the complete administrative review would uncover once every remaining recording and document was placed alongside the timeline that ordinary neighbors had already begun assembling together. 3 days after the meeting, the community management representative contacted Nathan Brooks with an update that surprised him. The independent review had expanded beyond the original email because additional homeowners had voluntarily submitted security recordings covering the neighborhood entrance, the clubhouse parking area, and the walking path from several new angles. Nathan arrived at the management office carrying nothing more than his original timeline because he wanted to answer questions only if necessary. Inside the conference room, the representative explained that every newly submitted recording had been synchronized with the files already collected from Richard Evans, Olivia Grant, and the other residents. The completed timeline now stretched from the first emergency call until the final emergency vehicle left the neighborhood. More importantly, every independent recording continued to support the same sequence of events. Nathan quietly watched as the representative compared the updated timeline against the official written summary, one line at a time. Several differences that had seemed minor during the community meeting now became impossible to dismiss. The verified recordings consistently showed neighbors cooperating, maintaining a clear pathway, and allowing emergency personnel to assume control immediately upon arrival. The written account, however, described several key moments in a different order. During the review, another unexpected detail emerged. A camera overlooking the neighborhood entrance captured the exact moment the emergency vehicle entered the community, while another camera near the clubhouse recorded the responders arriving at the scene less than a minute later. Those synchronized timestamps confirmed that the response had been prompt and uninterrupted. Susan Miller's handwritten notes matched those same times almost perfectly, providing an additional independent reference that had been created before any official communication had been distributed. The representative thanked every resident who had contributed information, explaining that the consistency across unrelated sources significantly strengthened the review. Later that afternoon, Karen Whitmore attended a scheduled administrative session with the management company and the board. Nathan was not present for that discussion, but he was informed afterward that the review focused entirely on documentation rather than personal opinions. Every timeline, recording, witness note, and communication had been examined together to determine the most accurate record of the emergency. By early evening, the representative contacted Nathan once again with preliminary findings. The review concluded that the official summary did not accurately reflect the verified sequence established by the combined evidence. Because of that conclusion, the previously distributed email would be formally withdrawn and replaced with a corrected community update after the board completed its final review. Nathan thanked the representative for the call and quietly placed his phone on the kitchen table. He felt relieved, but not because anyone had agreed with him. He felt relieved because the discussion had finally become centered on facts instead of assumptions. The following morning, neighbors began exchanging messages after hearing that the administrative review was nearing completion. Many expressed appreciation that multiple residents had worked together instead of relying on rumors. Others admitted they had originally accepted the first email without questioning it, only to realize how important independent evidence could be during an unexpected situation. As Nathan walked through the neighborhood that evening, several people stopped to thank him for remaining patient throughout the process. He smiled politely and reminded each person that the security cameras had done the most important work. They had quietly preserved moments exactly as they happened, while memories naturally became less certain with time. Standing near the clubhouse as the sun settled behind the trees, Nathan looked toward the familiar sidewalks where everything had begun. The emergency itself had ended days earlier, but the search for an accurate record had changed the entire conversation. Now only one final step remained. The corrected report would soon be presented to every resident, and for the first time since the original email appeared, the neighborhood would finally see the complete timeline exactly as it had unfolded. 2 evenings later, nearly every seat inside the neighborhood clubhouse was occupied before the scheduled meeting even began. The atmosphere felt noticeably different from the first gathering. There were no whispered rumors and very little speculation. Most residents had already heard that the independent review was complete, and they had come to understand what the final record would reveal. Nathan Brooks took a seat near the middle of the room beside Richard Evans, Olivia Grant, Susan Miller, and several neighbors who had contributed recordings during the review. None of them discussed what they expected to happen. They simply waited. Karen Whitmore opened the meeting with a calm greeting before inviting the community management representative to present the results of the administrative review. The representative thanked the residents for their patience and cooperation throughout the process. A large display at the front of the room showed the synchronized timeline assembled from every available security camera, witness note, and verified document. Instead of beginning with conclusions, the representative carefully replayed the complete sequence from the first emergency call until the final emergency vehicle departed the neighborhood. Every camera transitioned smoothly into the next, creating one continuous record that anyone in the room could easily follow. The timestamps matched across every source. Richard's camera showed neighbors gathering. Olivia's recording captured the walkway remaining clear. Another homeowner's system documented the emergency vehicle entering the neighborhood without delay. Susan's handwritten notes aligned with the arrival times shown on the videos. One verified source supported another until the entire timeline stood together without contradiction. When the replay ended, the representative displayed the previously distributed community summary beside the reconstructed timeline. The differences were highlighted one by one. Several events had been placed in a different order than the recordings demonstrated. Important moments of cooperation had been omitted. The final review concluded that the written account did not accurately represent the verified sequence established through independent evidence. The representative then announced the official findings. The original community email would be withdrawn from the association records. A corrected summary based entirely on the verified timeline would replace it, ensuring future reference materials accurately reflected what had occurred. In addition, the board had approved new documentation procedures requiring factual verification whenever significant community incidents were summarized for residents. The room remained quiet for several seconds before a gentle round of applause spread through the audience. It was not directed toward any individual. Instead, it acknowledged that the neighborhood had reached an outcome based on cooperation rather than conflict. Karen Whitmore then stood and addressed the residents. She stated that the board accepted the findings of the independent review and supported updating the official record to match the verified evidence. She thanked the homeowners who had preserved recordings and contributed information that helped establish a complete timeline. Nathan appreciated that the discussion remained respectful from beginning to end. There were no personal accusations, only an acknowledgement that accurate records mattered to everyone living in the community. As residents began leaving the clubhouse, many stopped to thank one another for participating in the review. Conversations centered on transparency, communication, and the value of preserving facts before drawing conclusions. Nathan stepped outside into the cool evening air and looked across the quiet neighborhood toward the recreation area, where everything had begun only days earlier. The emergency itself had passed quickly, but the search for the truth had taken patience, careful documentation, and the willingness of ordinary neighbors to work together. Looking back at the clubhouse one last time, Nathan realized that the corrected report represented more than a revised document. It represented a community choosing accuracy over assumption, and that decision would shape how future emergencies were understood long after this one had become part of the neighborhood's history. During the weeks that followed, the neighborhood slowly settled back into its familiar rhythm. Yet Nathan Brooks noticed that something important had quietly changed. Residents no longer relied on quick assumptions whenever unusual events occurred. Instead, they asked questions, compared information, and encouraged one another to verify details before reaching conclusions. The atmosphere felt lighter, not because disagreements had disappeared, but because people trusted the process more than rumors. The Homeowners Association soon introduced the new documentation procedures approved during the final meeting. Community summaries would now include verified timelines whenever appropriate. Residents directly involved in significant incidents would have an opportunity to provide factual statements before official communications were distributed, and supporting documentation would be preserved as part of the association records. They were simple changes, but everyone understood why they mattered. Nathan never expected to influence neighborhood policy simply by insisting that the facts be recorded accurately. Yet, that was exactly what had happened. One Saturday morning, while watering the flowers along his front walkway, he saw Karen Whitmore speaking with several volunteers preparing decorations for an upcoming community picnic. She noticed Nathan, smiled politely, and walked over to greet him. Their conversation lasted only a few minutes and focused entirely on future neighborhood events. There was no awkwardness, no lingering argument, and no attempt to revisit the emergency. The official record had already been corrected, and both understood that the community had chosen to move forward. Nathan appreciated that the discussion remained respectful because the goal had never been to embarrass anyone. It had always been to make sure the truth remained intact. Later that afternoon, Richard Evans, Olivia Grant, Susan Miller, and several other neighbors gathered in Nathan's backyard for coffee and conversation. Before long, someone joked that the neighborhood security cameras had become the most trusted witnesses on the block. Everyone laughed because the statement contained more truth than humor. Those cameras had never formed opinions, repeated rumors, or taken sides. They had simply continued recording ordinary life exactly as it unfolded. Looking around at the familiar faces, Nathan realized the strongest part of the experience had not been proving the timeline correct. It had been watching neighbors cooperate even after they initially disagreed. Each person contributed one small piece until the complete picture finally emerged. As evening settled across the community, families walked their dogs, children rode bicycles along the sidewalks, and porch lights gradually illuminated the quiet street. Everything looked exactly as it had before the emergency, yet Nathan understood the neighborhood had gained something valuable that could not be measured. Trust had been rebuilt through patience rather than confrontation. Accuracy had replaced assumption. Cooperation had overcome confusion. Before going inside for the night, Nathan opened the folder containing the printed timeline, witness notes, and copies of the security recordings one final time. He carefully placed everything into a storage box, labeled it with the date, and slid it onto a shelf in the hallway closet. He did not keep the files because he expected another dispute. He kept them as a reminder that calm persistence often speaks louder than frustration. Standing on his porch beneath the quiet glow of the evening light, Nathan glanced toward the recreation area where the emergency had first unfolded. What began as an ordinary afternoon had become an unexpected lesson for an entire community. The facts had never changed. Only the story around them had. In the end, patience, honest neighbors, and a collection of ordinary security cameras quietly ensured that the truth found its way back to where it belonged, reminding everyone that the strongest neighborhoods are built not only with well-kept homes, but with fairness, accountability, and the courage to let the complete story be told.